I want to be clear before any of this sounds like bragging that I did not plan it. I did not cultivate it, engineer it, or even fully understand what was happening until about month 5. I am a transit manifest checker on a mid-run cargo station. I verify load weights, cross-reference species cargo documentation, sign off on pen assignments, and eat the same flatbread I pack from my bunk every morning at 06:30 in the sub-7 hold because the mess line on level 3 has a 40-minute queue, and I have never once had 40 minutes to spare. That is the whole of it. That is, I want to emphasize the entire sum of what I was doing. The Vrethkai were incidental to the job. They are listed in the manifest as Class 7 restricted cargo, live transport, requires dedicated pen cluster, 2-meter minimum buffer zone between pen and personnel corridor, do not approach, do not make direct eye contact, do not produce high-frequency sounds in close proximity. The Portmaster's transit guide runs to 14 cautionary paragraphs. I've read them. I continue to read them every time a new consignment comes through because it is technically required for sign-off. And I am, whatever else may be said about me, meticulous about my documentation. Corveth Station handles a lot of Vrethkai transits. We sit on the outer freight corridor, 3 days from the Gren hub, which means we're the last resupply and holding point before the long run out to the colonial and military installations on the frontier edge. The Vrethkai go out there as warpack assets, bonded combat units, trained handlers, the full apparatus of whatever the frontier commands consider essential. They come back through us on rotation. Older animals, breeding groups, juveniles not yet assigned to a handler cohort. In an average quarter, I'll sign off on 4 or 5 consignments. That's maybe 30 animals in and out of sub-7 over 3 months, and in the ordinary course of things, I never get closer than the prescribed 2-meter buffer while I'm doing my counts. The transit restriction exists for good reasons. Vrethkai are not aggressive by default. The handler literature is very clear on this, and my experience confirms it. But they are large, they are fast, they are built from the inside out for a kind of efficiency that tends to go badly for things that find themselves on the receiving end of it. And they are socially complex in ways that the transit guide's 14 paragraphs do a poor job of capturing. The guide talks about containment and distance and emergency procedures. It does not talk about what the species is actually like, which is patient, curious, extremely attentive to detail, and possessed of a social intelligence that the frontier handler community spent 30 years documenting, and that the transit authority apparently has not gotten around to reading. The thing about a 2-meter buffer is that it is a fine distance when the pen gates are latched, and the animals are eating or resting. And it is a considerably less reassuring distance when the pen gate has been installed 2 centimeters off plumb, and the latch doesn't seat correctly, and a 7-month-old Vrethkai cub is smart enough to have worked this out. I discovered this on a Tuesday, 14 months ago now. I was counting the sub-7 C-cluster intake, a consignment of 5 animals, the matriarch hollowhorn, 2 adolescents, and 2 cubs. Though I didn't know their names then, I had to work those out later from the handler notes in the transfer documentation. I was on my 3rd pass, which I do because the C-cluster pens are awkwardly positioned, and the lighting is poor in the far corners, and I had just reached pen C9 when I became aware that something was standing directly behind me. I am going to describe what a 7-month Vrethkai looks like for the benefit of anyone reading this who has only seen them in the standard transit documentation, which uses a diagram that is, I now know, significantly underscaled. A 7-month Vrethkai cub is approximately the size of a large terrestrial draft animal, though lower slung and heavier boned. It has 6 limbs, the forward pair of which function as both forelimbs and weight-bearing arms capable of manipulating objects. Its hide is plated, not continuously, but in overlapping sections like old armor, matte charcoal gray with a faint iridescent blue at the plate edges when the light catches them correctly. Its head is broad and low-set, with a wide jaw housing teeth designed for prey that doesn't want to be caught, and a pair of resonance ridges along the skull that produce the subsonic calls the species uses for pack communication. When a Vrethkai resonates in close proximity, you feel it more than hear it, a pressure behind the sternum and in the back teeth, like the moment before a pressure seal fails. The one behind me was making a very quiet version of this, not the full resonance, a small, exploratory vibration like a question. I turned around slowly. This is not what the transit guide recommends. The transit guide recommends activating your emergency locator, backing toward the nearest bulkhead door, and shouting for assistance. I have read this recommendation several times and I understand its intent, but in the moment I was holding a manifest board with my count on it, and I had 17 more line items to verify, and my honest thought was, if I trigger the emergency protocol, the portmaster's people are going to spend 4 hours reprocessing this consignment, and I'm going to be here until midnight. The cub was approximately half a meter from my face. This is well inside the 2-meter buffer. Its resonance ridges were vibrating at a frequency I now understand is associated with investigative interest, what the handler literature calls the query pulse. Its eyes, which are a very deep amber, the color of old resin, were fixed on the flatbread I had tucked under my arm because I hadn't had time to finish it at 06:30. I looked at the cub. The cub looked at the flatbread. I looked at the cub looking at the flatbread. I broke off a corner of the flatbread and held it out. This is, I am aware, not in the transit guide. In fact, the transit guide specifically prohibits offering food to transit animals, citing unpredictable habituation responses and liability concerns. I want to be clear that I am not recommending my approach. I am simply explaining what happened. The cub took the flatbread corner. It did not take my hand with it, which I noted as a positive outcome. It chewed the flatbread with a methodical attention that made the whole operation look considered rather than hasty, tilted its head slightly, then pressed the top of its skull very gently against my chest, the resonance ridges just touching the front of my jacket, and produced the quiet question vibration again. Closer now and slower. I stood there for a moment with a manifest board in one hand and the remaining 2/3 of my flatbread in the other, with a Vrethkai cub resting its armored head against my sternum. The plating was warmer than I expected. The resonance was slow and even, like a heartbeat settling. I finished my count. I noted the unlatched pen in my discrepancy report and flagged it for maintenance. I filed the consignment as received. Then I went to the manifest office and ate the rest of my flatbread and thought about what had just happened, which I concluded was nothing, probably. Animals investigate things. The cub was curious. It would not remember me by morning. I was wrong about that, as it turned out. The next morning I came down to Sub-7 for the routine welfare check, which is a form requirement on all live consignments in my care. The pen gate on C9 had been repaired overnight. I noted this in my log and began my walk of the cluster, and I was 3 pens in when the resonance started. A low, building hum from C9 that I felt more than heard, that pulse question frequency, and I looked up to find the cub had its broad gray head pressed to the gate mesh, amber eyes tracking me with the focused, patient attention of something that has been waiting for a specific person, and has not been in any doubt that the person would return. I went to the gate, I stood there, the resonance continued slow and even. I had not brought extra flatbread. I made a mental note for the following morning. This is how it started. I want to be very clear that there was no dramatic revelation, no moment where I realized I was doing something unusual. I brought flatbread. The cub met me at the gate. I stood at the gate for 5 or 10 minutes while I checked my daily sublevels manifest, and the cub, I learned her name was Sekit, from the handler transfer notes. Sekit pressed her resonance ridges to the gate mesh and her amber eyes were on my face, and the question pulse was there, steady and slow, and she seemed, in some way I can't fully articulate, to find my presence satisfactory. By the third week, both the other cubs were at the gate when I arrived. Drun, the male, was larger than Sekit by about 30%, and had developed the habit of inserting his broad snout between the mesh squares to sniff my manifest board, which left considerable scoring on the documentation that I had to explain more than once to the consignment office. I told them it was pen mesh contact damage from the welfare check rounds, which was true in the strictest technical sense. Drun was also the most exploratory of the three. He would investigate the hinges on the gate frame, the bolts on the corridor railing, the manifest board's edge, my left boot, methodically and without urgency, like someone working through a checklist. I appreciated this about him. It felt like a professional kinship. Maeve was the smallest of the three, quieter, and she took longer to approach. She would sit at the back of the pen for the first few minutes and watch, and then when Sekit and Drun had confirmed my presence to her satisfaction, she would come forward and press her forehead to the gate beside Sekit's. Her resonance was slightly higher in frequency than the others, not quite the same query pulse, something softer than that. The handler manual I later consulted described a similar frequency as the familiarization tone, the sound a young Vrethkai produces when it is in the process of integrating a new pack member into its internal model of the world. I did not know this at the time. I thought she was shy, and I gave her extra flatbread. I brought enough flatbread for 3 from week 4 onward. The matriarch Hollowhorn was in C7, 2 pens over. She was 12 years old according to her transfer documentation, which makes her elderly by Vrethkai standards. The species average runs to about 9 or 10 years in active pack service. She was larger than the cubs by a substantial margin, a full war-weight adult, her plating darker and heavier scarred, her resonance ridges broader and more pronounced. One of the ridges had a notch in it, an old scar healed smooth. The documentation listed it as a frontier incident, no further detail. The transit documentation noted her as a retired breeding female, being transferred to a frontier sanctuary facility on the outbound run. She had been through this station twice before in transit, and I found an old welfare check in the archive with a note from my predecessor that said only, Matriarch C7, non-reactive, calm, which I thought was either a very complete assessment or a very incomplete one, depending on how much my predecessor had been paying attention. She did not come to the gate the first week, or the second. She watched from the back of C7 with the unhurried stillness of something that has seen a great many things in 12 years and has learned to evaluate them thoroughly before deciding whether they merit attention. I did my checks. I stood at Sekit's gate, I stood at Drun's gate, I stood at Maeve's gate, and I was aware each morning of Hollowhorn's amber eyes tracking me from the far end of her pen. She was not hostile. She was not anxious. She was simply watching, with an evaluative patience that I recognized from the best cargo inspectors I had worked under, the ones who looked at a pallet and a manifest and took the time to see whether the two things matched. The fourth week she was at the gate when I arrived. I stood there for a moment. Hollowhorn was considerably larger than the cubs at close range, the full adult frame of a 12-year-old war-beast matriarch, broad-shouldered and heavy-plated, her head at my shoulder height. Her resonance ridges were inactive. She was simply looking at me with the amber eyes and the absolute, unblinking patience of an apex predator that has elected to wait. Her scarred ridge caught the sub-7 utility lighting, and the notch in it threw a small shadow, curved like a quarter moon. I held out a piece of flatbread. She took it. She ate it with a deliberate, methodical care that was oddly courtly. Then she looked at the manifest board under my arm. I held it up so she could see it, which I could not have explained at the time but which seemed, in the moment, like the natural thing to do. She looked at it for a long moment, tilted her head the same angle as Sekit, then turned away and went back to the center of her pen and lay down with the slow, considered gravity of something that has completed an assessment and reached a conclusion. I filed my welfare check. I noted in the internal memo section, which is not forwarded to anyone, C7 matriarch behavioral note approaches gate calm, no escalation indicators. Cubs continue gate contact behavior, no concerning incidents. That is the level of my documentation. I was not, I want to be clear, writing operatic notes about how a 12-year-old war beast matriarch had decided I was acceptable. I was logging welfare observations in the format required by the Transit Authority. I am a meticulous note-taker. I am not a poet. In month 2, the consignment rotation turned over. A new group came through, 3 adolescents, 2 adults, no cubs this time, and went on their way after the standard holding period. The adolescents were energetic in the way that young Vrethkai are, which is to say constantly, and Sub-7 had some vibration readings during that holding period that I logged and maintenance investigated and found to be structural resonance from the animals rather than anything mechanical. I put in my welfare check notes that the animals were in good health and displaying age-appropriate activity levels, which was accurate. Hollowhorn and the 3 cubs were held over because the sanctuary transfer had been delayed by a frontier transit freeze, and then delayed again, and then the freeze extended, and by month 3 it was clear that Corvith Station was going to be home for this particular group for a while longer. I did not petition for the extension. I want to be very clear about this. I filed the administrative paperwork the Transit Authority required. I updated the holding status documentation, and I continued to bring flatbread every morning and do my welfare checks and stand at the gates while 3 cubs pressed resonance ridges to mesh, and an old matriarch watched from the back of her pen with patient amber eyes. In month 3, the pen gate on C7 developed the same fault as C9 had 8 months prior. I noticed this on my morning check before maintenance did. I noted it in my discrepancy report, and I was standing there writing the discrepancy report when Hollowhorn walked through the gate, which she had clearly been waiting to do, and stood in the corridor next to me. The transit guide has a very specific protocol for escaped animals in a personnel corridor. It involves alarms, isolation procedures, emergency sedation teams, and full hold lockdown. I know this protocol. I have in fact run a simulation drill for it. I looked at Hollowhorn. Hollowhorn looked at me. The resonance was not the cub's small question pulse. It was deeper, slower, a long, steady vibration like a ship's hull in deep water, a sound that settled into the bone and stayed there. It was not threatening. It was not the query pulse either. It was something I didn't have a name for yet that I later found in the handler manual, the pack acknowledgement resonance. The sound the matriarch makes when she has decided that something belongs to the pack. I filed my discrepancy report. I noted the open gate. I did not trigger the escape protocol. Instead, I continued my welfare check with Hollowhorn walking beside me at my left shoulder, and I can report that the C-cluster welfare status at that time was all animals calm, no distress indicators, feeding normally. I wrote this in the memo field. I also wrote, matriarch ambulatory in corridor, gate fault open, no escalation, returned voluntarily to pen at end of check. Flag for maintenance priority. Maintenance did not understand the priority flag. They fixed it the next day. Hollowhorn waited. When the new gate was installed, she investigated it for about 90 seconds, found it correctly latched, and went back to her spot in the center of her pen. She did not seem disappointed. She seemed, if anything, satisfied. Month 4 was when other people started noticing. The Sub-7 hold is a restricted level, which means traffic is limited to authorized personnel with hold level clearance. Myself, 2 other manifest staff who cover alternate shifts, the maintenance crew, and the transit veterinary officers who do the scheduled welfare inspections. Nobody is supposed to be down there casually, and in ordinary circumstances nobody is. But the hold level clearance list is administered by Portmaster Drev Ossian's office. And one morning in month 4, I arrived on Sub-7 to find 2 of Ossian's junior transit administrators doing what they told me was a compliance review of the pen cluster documentation. They were standing outside the C-cluster entry looking at handheld readers. They looked up when I came through the bulkhead door. One of them, a young Keth male, which is a species with very good hearing and very acute threat assessment instincts, went still in the particular way that prey animals go still when they have detected something they cannot yet see clearly. The other one, an older tall female, had the look of someone who had been sent to do a job and was in the process of reconsidering whether it was a good job to have been sent to do. I looked past them. All 4 pen gates were occupied. Sekit and Drun and Maeve in a line, resonance ridges active, the steady watching frequency. Not the query pulse, not the pack acknowledgement, something in between, evaluative and attentive. Hollowhorn behind them in C7, standing, her broad head level, eyes on the 2 administrators with an attention that was absolute and entirely unambiguous. The Sub-7 hold is not a large space. 4 Vrethkai at full alert occupy it differently than 4 Vrethkai at rest. The resonance changes register. The Keth male stopped moving in that full-body stillness, every instinct telling him something his brain was still processing. The tall female put her handreader down very slowly. "Morning," I said, and walked past them to begin my check. They left before I finished the first pen. I logged the visit in my welfare check notes as external personnel, non-standard Sub-7 access, no interaction with animals, departed without incident. This happened twice more over the following 3 weeks. The second time, one of the administrators had been replaced by an older tall inspector I didn't recognize, and the third time it was just the inspector alone, who stood at the C-cluster entry for about 4 minutes while all 4 Vrethkai watched him with the focused stillness of something deciding a question, then left without writing anything down that I could see. I checked whether he had filed a report in the transit system. He had not. I thought about this occasionally. I thought about what question he had been deciding, standing there in the C-cluster entry with 4 sets of amber eyes on him, and what answer he had come away with. I continued to do my checks. I continued to bring flatbread. I continued to spend 5 or 10 minutes at the gates while the cubs pressed resonance ridges to mesh and Hollowhorn stood at the back of her pen and watched. It did not seem complicated to me. I had a job and I was doing it. In month 5, the first consignment rotation since the hold extension brought in a new group, 4 adults, 2 breeding pairs, designated for frontier military handler assignment. They were in the B cluster, which is a separate pen configuration on the other side of Sub-7, and I was doing the intake count when I heard the resonance. I want to describe what pack resonance sounds like when it is not directed at you, for context. When Sekit does the question pulse at the gate, it is personal, small, intimate, something you feel in your chest like a single slow finger pressed to the sternum. When all 4 animals in C-cluster resonate together, which they do sometimes when a maintenance crew makes noise near the hold, it is not a question. It is a statement. It fills the Sub-7 air with a pressure you feel in the soles of your feet and behind your eyes. A subvocal declaration that carries no specific information a human brain can parse, but that the human hindbrain hears perfectly well, because the hindbrain is very old, and it knows the sound of a pack announcing itself. The 4 adults in B cluster heard it too. When I got to B cluster for my count, all 4 of them were standing in their pen gates facing C cluster with their resonance ridges at full extension, and it took me a moment to understand that they were not producing the resonance. They were receiving it. They were standing there listening to C cluster with an attention that looked, very clearly, like the attention of something hearing a message it understands and is thinking carefully about. The handler literature has a term for this. I found it later in the same frontier manual, the affiliation broadcast. When a bonded pack produces the pack acknowledgement resonance, other Vrethkai in range hear it as information. This one is claimed. This one has standing. This one is under the pack's protection. I finished my count. I logged the intake. In the internal memo field I wrote, B-cluster intake, 4 adults, no anomalous behaviors. C-cluster resonance event during intake, duration approximately 11 minutes, B-cluster animals attentive, no escalation. Flag for veterinary note. The veterinary officer reviewed my note and left a response that said, "Resonance events normal during new intake adjacency. No action required." I appreciated this. It confirmed that I was not imagining things, while also not requiring me to explain anything further. Month 6 was when Portmaster Ossian summoned me to his office. I want to describe Ossian because he will be important later, and it is relevant to understanding the shape of what happened. He is a Vrethkai, which is a species approximately 20% larger than a standard human male, with a broad chest and a flat, wide face that is very good at projecting authority without expression. He has been portmaster of Corvith Station for 11 years, and in those 11 years he has, by the general consensus of everyone who works here, never once made an administrative decision that wasn't primarily about reinforcing his own authority. He is not cruel exactly. He is territorial. He is the kind of person who reads every subroutine of every protocol and enforces the ones that are useful to him and ignores the ones that aren't. And he is deeply, personally offended by things that don't fit inside his protocols. The summons arrived as a formal notification in my shift queue, which is the kind of summons that means someone wants a paper record of the meeting. I noted this. I brought my manifest documentation, my welfare check logs, the full 8 months of Sub-7 records, and my copy of the Transit Authority Live Cargo Guidelines, which I had reread the previous evening. Ossian was behind his desk with the tall inspector from the 3rd compliance visit, whose name turned out to be Andrev, and a junior administrator I hadn't seen before. "Voss," Ossian said, and pulled up something on his desk screen that he turned so I could see it. It was the Sub-7 access log. My entries every morning, sometimes twice a day during extended holding periods, a column of timestamps going back 8 months with my identifier on every row. You've been down there every day for 8 months. I have welfare check responsibilities for all live cargo in extended hold, I said. The Transit Authority guidelines require daily welfare assessment for any live cargo held beyond the standard transit window. I'm compliant with the requirement. The welfare check takes approximately 20 minutes for a 4-animal cluster. Yes. Your average Sub-7 dwell time over the past 6 months is 43 minutes. I looked at the screen. He had pulled the access log data and averaged it. I had not done this calculation myself, but I did not find the number surprising. I eat my morning meal on Sub-7, I said. It's quieter than the level 3 mess. Ossian looked at me for a moment. Andrev made a note on something. The junior administrator, a young pale female, was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Not the Keth male's threat assessment stillness, something more like careful attention, the look of someone who is nodding down more than what's being said aloud. The Vrethkai in C-Cluster are not your animals, Voss. I know that. They're restricted transit cargo. I know that. The purpose of the transit restriction is to prevent habituation events that would complicate eventual transfer or handler assignment. He settled back in his chair. I have received 2 veterinary reports and 1 behavioral note from the Frontier Sanctuary team. The one that's supposed to be receiving that consignment, expressing concern about behavioral indicators in the C-Cluster group that suggest irregular human bonding. I kept my face neutral. I was thinking about what that meant practically, about the access restriction he was clearly about to issue, about Second at the gate at 06:30 the following morning with no one coming through the bulkhead door. I thought about what that would mean to Second. I thought about what it would mean to Hollowhorn, standing at her gate in the slow foundational vibration, waiting. I thought about these things for approximately 3 seconds, and then I thought about the fact that Ossian had the authority to restrict my access, and I needed to handle this in the correct order. "What would you like me to do?" I said. "Limit your Sub-7 time to the required welfare check period. 20 minutes, no more. No feeding of transit animals. and I'll be having your access reviewed for the next consignment rotation." He clicked off the desk screen. "I'm not accusing you of deliberate policy violation, Voss. I'm telling you the situation has become irregular and I need it normalized." "Understood," I said. I went back to Sub 7 that afternoon for my scheduled afternoon welfare check, which is a requirement I have for any live cargo consignment, where the morning check logged a behavioral note. I had logged a behavioral note that morning, a routine one, but a behavioral note. My check took exactly 22 minutes, which is within acceptable range. I did not bring flatbread. Sekit met me at the gate. The question pulse was there, the slow personal vibration I had been hearing for 8 months, and she pressed her resonance ridges to the mesh and her amber eyes were on my face. I stood there for a moment without the flatbread, and I felt the absence of it more than I expected to, because it had been the thing I was offering, the small ordinary thing, and without it I was just standing at a pen gate with my manifest board. Sekit didn't seem to notice the absence. The resonance continued, patient and even. I did my check. I filed my notes. I did not write anything in the internal memo field. Month 7. I reduced my Sub 7 dwell time to the mandated window. I stopped bringing flatbread from month 7 onward and ate it at my desk instead, which is substantially less pleasant because my desk is in the manifest office on level 2, and the ventilation system on level 2 has always had a problem I have reported 14 times, and that maintenance has addressed 7 times with decreasing enthusiasm. I did my checks. I logged my notes. The animals continued to be in good welfare condition, and I said so. Hollowhorn was at C7 gate every morning, not pressed to the mesh like the cubs, standing, just standing, watching the bulkhead door, and when I came through the resonance would start, not the question pulse, not the pack acknowledgement, but something quieter than both, a long low frequency I didn't have a name for until I finally found it in an old Frontier Handler manual I borrowed from the station library. The manual called it the station tone. It's what a Vrethkai produces when it is aware that something it considers pack is in the vicinity but not within immediate contact. A locating resonance. The sound the matriarch makes so the pack knows where everyone is. I am in the manifest section of this station's records. I am 34 years old and I check cargo weights for a living. I was on Hollowhorn's locating resonance. She knew when I came on shift. She knew when I was on level 2. She knew, in whatever way that frequency carried information through the station's bones, that I was there. I thought about this on the elevator between Sub 7 and level 2. I thought about it in a way that was not alarming, exactly. It was more like finding out that something had been true for a long time before you named it. Month 8 began 3 weeks before what I am going to describe now, and it began with a new development in Ossian's management of the Sub 7 situation. He issued a formal access modification, notice removing my routine welfare check authority for the C-cluster group, and transferring it to the station's contracted veterinary officer, who would now handle all C-cluster welfare assessments. I would retain responsibility for the manifest documentation, but my Sub 7 access was restricted to intake and departure procedures only. The notice was formally within his authority. The Transit Authority guidelines allow portmaster discretion in welfare assessment assignment for extended hold situations where habituation concerns have been documented. I read the relevant clause carefully. He was compliant. I responded with a formal acknowledgement of the notice, which I am required to do. I noted in my personal log, not the official one, the small notebook I keep because I find physical notation useful for thinking, that this was going to be a problem, and I tried to work out whether there was an administrative route that wasn't going to end with me appealing over Ossian's head to the Transit Authority, which would take 3 months and might not go anywhere. And while I was doing this, the access modification went into effect, and I did not go to Sub 7 the following morning. I went to Sub 7 the morning after that, for a manifest documentation task that required me to verify pen configuration measurements ahead of the next consignment rotation. This is a legitimate manifest function. I had a tape measure. I had my manifest board. I went through the bulkhead door at 0640, and by the time I had reached the C-cluster entry, the resonance was filling the entire sub-7 hold with a frequency that pushed at the back of my eyes. All 4 animals were at their gates. Hollowhorn was not at the back of her pen. She was at the gate, the same as the cubs, standing with her broad, scarred head pressed to the mesh. The station tone was not a locating resonance. It was the pack acknowledgement again, the slow, deep vibration that says, "This one is ours." I took my measurements. I wrote them down. I stood at the gates for 11 minutes because I told myself I was reviewing the pen configuration documentation, which I was, in the sense that I was holding the documentation. Then I went back up to level 2 and sat at my desk and ate my flatbread and stared at the ventilation grill for a while. 2 days later, Ossian sent 2 transit enforcers to Sub-7 to remove me. I want to be precise about this. He sent 2 transit enforcers, which is the station authority's uniformed personnel with administrative detention capability. Their names were Preth and Vosk. They came to Sub-7 during my scheduled manifest verification window for the B-cluster documentation, which is another legitimate manifest function. And Preth told me my Sub-7 access had been suspended pending review, and I would need to come with them to the transit office to complete the review paperwork. I said, my manifest verification window for B-cluster is. Preth grabbed my arm. I did not say anything. I have been doing this job for 6 years, and I have had disagreements with port authorities before, and I know when an argument is going to go somewhere and when it isn't. Preth was approximately twice my weight and had the polished look of someone who very much enjoys the part of his job that involves grabbing people's arms, and the review paperwork was presumably a formality that Ossian needed on file, and I thought, I'll go, I'll sign whatever he needs signed, I'll figure out the administrative route after. So I didn't say anything, and then Vosk, who was behind me, put his hand on my shoulder and pushed, and I stumbled forward into Preth, and Preth, apparently reading this as resistance, shoved me back, and I went into the B-cluster corridor railing with my shoulder blade and dropped my manifest board. It was not a severe impact. I want to be clear about that. My shoulder was sore for 2 days. The manifest board was undamaged, which is the more pressing concern from a documentation standpoint. I was not seriously hurt. What I was in that moment was very quiet. What I heard in that moment was the resonance. It started in C-cluster, which is around the corner and through the intermediate bulkhead from B-cluster, so I should not technically have been able to hear it clearly. But I heard it. It started with Sekit. I know her frequency well enough now to identify it, the slightly higher register, her particular query pulse gone now and replaced by something else entirely, and then Drun, and then Maeve, and then Hollowhorn's deep foundational hum under all 3 of them, and then the B-cluster adults that had been in their pens for the past 7 weeks. They had been listening to C-cluster's affiliation broadcast for 7 weeks. They knew what the pack acknowledgement resonance was and who it was for. It was not the question pulse, and it was not the station tone, and it was not the pack acknowledgement. It was the pack vengeance resonance. I had read about this in the Frontier Handler manuals. I had never heard it. You typically only hear it once and then you hear nothing, because whatever generated it has happened to you. Preth let go of my arm. He and Vosk were both very still, the specific stillness of prey animals confronting something they don't have a protocol for. And Preth said something I didn't catch because the resonance was now so dense it was difficult to hear higher frequencies. It was not just a sound. It was a physical pressure, a change in the quality of the air in the B-cluster corridor, the kind of vibration that the body registers before the mind does, and that the body's response to is very old and very clear. Something is coming, and it has decided something, and the decision is not in your favor. Then the pen gate on C9 opened. I need to explain something about Vrethkai pen gate construction, because it is relevant. The gates are rated to Class 9 containment, which is the same standard used for the largest military cargo beasts transported through this system. The mechanism is magnetic seal primary with a mechanical backup latch, and the frame is 8mm plate alloy. The Transit Authority's assessment of the C9 gate failure in month 1 was latch misalignment, corrected. What I later found in the maintenance log was that the latch misalignment had been assessed as a 2mm deviation from specification, within tolerance, technically, for a standard cargo transit hold. The gate on C9 did not fail this time. Sekit pulled it open. I watched this happen from approximately 5 meters away. She pressed her forelimbs, the forward pair, which are built for manipulation as well as weight bearing, to the gate frame, found the latch mechanism, and applied a controlled lateral pressure that I later estimated based on the gate frame deformation at somewhere around 800 kilograms. The latch mechanism did not fail. The gate frame warped. The gate swung open. Sekit came through the gate and walked past me, directly to Preth, and sat down in front of him. I want to be very clear about what "sat down in front of him" means in this context. A 7-month Vrethkai in a seated position brings its head to approximately shoulder height on a standard adult humanoid. Sekit is 8 months old now, and she has grown since month 1, and she sat down in front of Preth with her head at his throat height, and her resonance ridges at full extension, producing the frequency I now recognized as Pack Vengeance, and her amber eyes on his face with the absolute, focused patience of something that has decided something, and is waiting to see if the situation requires it to do anything further. She was not growling. She was not snarling. She was sitting very still with her head at his throat and her amber eyes on his face, and the resonance was filling the corridor with a pressure that made the hull plating vibrate in its mountings, and she was simply waiting. Drun opened his gate approximately 4 seconds later, from the inside, using the same lateral pressure method, the same controlled force applied to the same point on the frame. He walked to Vosk. Maeve opened her gate 6 seconds after that. She walked to me, sat down at my left side, pressed her resonance ridges to my hip, and produced the station tone. I stood there for a moment. My shoulder was sore. My manifest board was on the floor. Preth and Vosk were both motionless with the frozen quality of something that has very suddenly understood that it is not the apex thing in the room and is in the process of recalculating everything it thought it knew about the room. Preth's hand was still half raised from where he had grabbed my arm. He did not move it. I don't think he was able to, quite, not yet. Hollowhorn came through her gate. She did not open it forcibly. She simply put her forelimbs on the frame, and the magnetic seal failed as though it had been planning to all along, and she walked past Preth and Vosk without acknowledging them at all, which was somehow worse than if she had looked at them, and she came to my right side and stood there. The resonance shifted. The Pack Vengeance frequency dropped slowly like a pressure equalization, and the station tone rose in its place, all 4 animals now producing it together, and the sound filled the hold with a vibration that felt like standing inside a ship's frame under full thrust, everything humming at once, a sound that said, "Here is where we are, and here is who we are with, and we know where everything else is too." Then Hollowhorn looked at my manifest board on the floor. I picked it up. Hollowhorn looked at the bulkhead door. I walked to the bulkhead door. Maeve walked with me on the left. Hollowhorn walked on my right. I did not look back at Preth and Vosk. I went through the bulkhead door and into the gangway, and I heard, behind me, the sound of the B-cluster adults, the 4 frontier military assignments that had been in their pens for 7 weeks, that had been listening to the affiliation broadcast for 7 weeks, that had been standing at their gates when the Pack Vengeance resonance started, adding their resonance to what was already filling the hold. And then I heard from further down, from the utility shaft access at the far end of the gangway, the sub-8 resonance beginning. I should explain what happened in the rest of the station over the next 40 minutes, because I did not see most of it and am reconstructing from station security logs that were later made available to me as part of the administrative process. The short version is, there are, at any given time on Corvith Station, between 12 and 18 Vrethkai in transit in one configuration or another across Sub-7 and Sub-8, which is the low or secondary hold. On the day I am describing, there were 16, divided between the C-cluster group, the B-cluster frontier assignment, and a new intake of 6 animals in Sub-8 that had arrived 2 days prior, and that I had not yet completed the full intake documentation for. The resonance carries through the station's internal structural members. Sub-7 and Sub-8 share a hull frame. The 6 animals in Sub-8 heard the Pack Vengeance frequency beginning in Sub-7. The handler documentation for those 6 animals, which I reviewed afterward, noted 3 of them as former Frontier Warpack veterans, retired from active service, being transferred to a breeding facility. Former Warpacks respond to Pack Vengeance resonance the way soldiers respond to a call to arms from a unit they spent years fighting beside. The frequency carries information that decades of retirement does not erase. Their bodies knew what the sound meant before their minds had time to do anything with the knowledge. The Sub-8 gate structure is rated to Class 10 containment, 1 grade above Sub-7. I note this in the interest of completeness. 3 of the Sub-8 gates failed within 9 minutes of the Sub-7 incident. The other 3 were opened by the Sub-8 maintenance worker who was on duty at the time, a pale male named Tessin, who told the inquiry afterward that when 3 Warpack veterans are resonating at full Pack Vengeance frequency from inside their pens and pressing their forelimbs to the gate frames, discretion seemed advisable, and he preferred to open the gates himself rather than see what happened to them if he didn't. Tessin is a practical man. I respect him. He also, I note, stepped aside and let them through and stood in his maintenance alcove with his back to the wall, and no one had to explain to him what to do next. 16 Vrethkai is not a large number in military terms. In the context of a mid-run cargo transit station with approximately 340 personnel and no Warpack handling infrastructure, it is quite a large number. The station security log shows the first alert at 07:04, 12 minutes after second open C9. By 07:11 there are alerts from 4 separate deck levels. The alert classification system cycled through several categories before settling on a generic, large-scale structural resonance event. Investigate flag, because none of the categories designed for security threats accurately described what was happening, which was 16 very large, very calm, very deliberate predators moving through the station in a coordinated manner toward a specific location, not attacking anyone, not threatening anyone, simply moving, and everything that was in their path choosing, with uniformly excellent judgment, to be somewhere else. I was on the gangway between Sub-7 and the Level 1 access corridor when the first of the Sub-8 animals came up the utility shaft. They navigated the shaft access by removing the maintenance covers, which are rated for incidental contact and are not rated for a determined Vrethkai, and joined the group around me, and the resonance recalibrated, and by the time I reached the Level 1 corridor there were 9 of them. The station tone was very loud. It was not aggressive. It was simply the sound of 9 Vrethkai being absolutely certain about where they were, and who they were with and why, and broadcasting this certainty through every structural member of Corvith Station. The security log later described it as equipment resonance anomaly, cause unknown. The cause was not unknown to anyone in the lower station. They knew exactly what it was. I know this because every corridor I walked through was empty. The station goes through approximately 800 personnel movements per hour during the morning shift. The Level 1 corridor, the Level 2 gangway access, the transit office block entry, empty. Not evacuated, exactly. The security alert system had not yet issued a formal evacuation order at that point. People had simply concluded, using their own judgment, that the corridor ahead of them did not require their presence. A Keth crew on the Level 1 freight bay, very good threat assessment instincts, as I mentioned, had apparently cleared their entire bay in under 90 seconds, which the security log records as a remarkable response time, and which I could have told them was simply the species operating correctly. A pair of Vrethkai transit inspectors on Level 2 had stepped into a utility closet and pulled the door closed, which was a dignified choice, and I have no criticism of it. I went to the transit office block because I had manifest documentation to complete. I want to be very clear that this was my purpose. I had a manifest board with incomplete B-cluster verification, and I needed to finish it. I went through the transit office block entry, and by that point we were at 16, all of them, the full count, the C-cluster group and the B-cluster assignment and the sub-8 veterans. And the transit office block has a standard corridor width of 4 meters, which accommodates the passage of a Vrethkai if the other things in the corridor have the good sense to move. The transit office staff had, in fact, made this determination and were pressed against the walls or had withdrawn into their office compartments, and a few of them were at their compartment viewports watching with expressions that I would characterize, for the record, as very attentive. Portmaster Ossian's office is at the end of the transit block, which is why I walked the full length of it, because my manifest office is 2 doors down from his. I sat down at my desk. Maeve sat down at my left, her resonance ridges against the side of my chair, the station tone at baseline. Hollowhorn stood in the doorway with the calm authority of something that has decided a question and has no remaining questions to decide. 6 more animals arranged themselves in the corridor outside, with the unhurried precision of creatures that know exactly where they want to be. And I knew from the resonance, I could feel it through the decking, through the desk, through the chair, that the others were on the lower levels, at the sub-7 and sub-8 entries, and at the station's external gangway connection, which is the point I could feel in the station tone where the perimeter was being established, quietly and completely, in the way that Vrethkai establish perimeters. Not noisily, not aggressively, simply by being there and making it clear that they know where everything is. I was aware that Ossian's office door was open. I was aware that he was standing in his doorway. I did not look up from my manifest board. "Voss," he said. "I have B-cluster verification to complete," I said. I was interrupted. There was a long silence. The station tone continued, 16 animals worth, filling the walls with a vibration that was not threatening now. The pack vengeance frequency had subsided once I was clear of Preth and Vosk, and what remained was the station tone, the locating frequency, all of them resonating the same declaration. This one is ours, and we know where he is, and we know where everyone else is, and we are comfortable with this situation, and we will continue to be comfortable with this situation as long as the situation continues to be comfortable. I finished the B-cluster verification. I moved to the intake documentation for the sub-8 new arrivals, which I was technically ahead of schedule on, but I felt it was good practice to have it completed. I date-stamped the forms. I cross-referenced the manifest weights. I wrote my notes. Ossian was still in his doorway. I could feel him deciding something. I did not hurry him. "The access modification notice," he said after a while. "Yes." Another pause. The resonance continued. Maeve's station tone against my chair leg was slow and even, a pulse I had been feeling for months now, the familiar frequency of something that has located what it was looking for and is content. "It can be reviewed," he said. "I appreciate that. The welfare check responsibility. It can be returned to your rotation." "Thank you." He said nothing for a while longer. I heard him move back into his office. I heard him sit down. I heard the sound of his desk screen activating, and then the sound of him, for the first time in 11 years as portmaster of Corvith Station, beginning to type something that was not about reinforcing his own authority. The station security system ran through its protocols and found no category that applied to the current situation, because the current situation was not an escape event, was not a containment failure in the conventional sense, was not an attack, was not any of the things the security protocols were built to address. The animals were calm. The personnel were unharmed. Everything was, technically, within parameters, if you define parameters broadly enough and chose not to look too carefully at the gate frames in Sub-7. Preth and Vosk, I learned later, had gone directly to the medical bay, where they were assessed and found to have elevated distress indicators but no physical injuries. The medical report noted that Preth had been in close contact with a Vrethkai subadult for approximately 90 seconds and recommended a follow-up behavioral wellness evaluation. I do not know if this evaluation occurred. I did not ask. By 09:30 the station tone had settled to its baseline frequency, which at 16 animals is still quite substantial, but is no longer something you feel in the soles of your feet, merely in the back of your chest. By midday, the Sub-8 new arrivals had returned to their pens of their own accord. I did not have to direct them. They simply went when it appeared that the situation required no further establishment of parameters. By mid-afternoon, the B-Cluster Frontier assignment was back in Sub-7. Sekit and Drun and Maeve were at their gates, and Hollowhorn was at hers, and the station tone was the quiet baseline of 4 animals locating their manifest checker as he finished his afternoon documentation at his desk on Level 2. The Frontier Handler community has a name for what happened that day. I found it in the same old manual where I found the Pack Vengeance resonance description. The manual called it Corridor Witness, the event in which a Vrethkai pack formally establishes, in the presence of a threat, the pack status of a non-Vrethkai affiliate. The manual noted that Corridor Witness was considered exceedingly rare in captive or transit populations, typically occurring only in active Warpack bonded units with multi-year handler relationships. The manual did not have a documented case involving a transit manifest checker and a flatbread portion. I added a note to that effect in my personal log. The administrative inquiry took 6 weeks. The transit authority sent 2 inspectors from the Gren Hub, which I thought was reasonable, and they interviewed me, Ossian, Preth, Vosk, Tessin the Sub-8 maintenance worker, and the veterinary officer. They reviewed the station security logs, the access logs, my welfare check documentation, and the Sub-7 and Sub-8 pen maintenance records going back 14 months. They conducted a behavioral assessment of all 16 animals and found them in good welfare condition with no anomalous aggressiveness indicators toward station personnel. The inquiry's findings stated that the incident represented an atypical but behaviorally consistent Vrethkai pack affiliation event precipitated by direct threat to an affiliated individual, and that the incident was non-escalatory in nature, with no personnel injuries, no permanent structural damage, and no welfare concerns for the animals involved. The gate frame deformations in C-Cluster were classified as maintenance items, existing facility wear. The Sub-8 gate failures were classified similarly. The inquiry also found that the access modification notice issued by Portmaster Ossian had been within his administrative authority, but had not been the proximate cause of the incident, the proximate cause having been the physical contact between transit enforcement personnel and an affiliated individual. This was phrased carefully. I appreciated the care. Preth was reassigned to the Level 4 documentation unit, which handles passenger cargo manifests and does not require Sub-7 access. Vosk took a transfer to another station. I did not advocate for either of these outcomes. Ossian made them, I think, before anyone asked him to, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has recalculated a situation and is adjusting to the new mathematics. Ossian himself continued as portmaster. He has not summoned me to his office since the inquiry. I pass him occasionally in the Level 2 corridor, and he nods at me with the expression of someone who is still in the process of integrating something, and I nod back. We are professionally courteous. The junior administrator, the pale female who had been in his office during month 6, I see more often now. She handles the sub-7 rotation documentation on his behalf, and she files her paperwork correctly, and she has never once, in 3 months of interaction, produced a high-frequency sound near the hold. The C-cluster group is still in holding. The Frontier Sanctuary transfer has been delayed again. At this point, I have stopped estimating a departure date, and I note without comment that the inquiry's findings have generated some interest from the Frontier Military Handler Command, whose liaison sent a query last month about C-cluster's status. I filed an accurate welfare report in response. I noted that the animals were in good health. I did not speculate about anything further. My sub-7 dwell time, since the inquiry is not tracked. I bring flatbread every morning. I bring enough for 4 Second and Drun and Mave and Hollowhorn, and I have been experimenting with a second variety that has a seed coating, because Drun has been investigating it with more than his usual thoroughness, and I think he has a preference I haven't fully mapped yet. I do my welfare checks. I stand at the gates and the resonance is there. The station tone, slow and even, the matriarch and her 3 cubs locating their manifest checker at 06:30 in the morning in sub-7 of Corvith Station. The 6 sub-8 animals are on my welfare check rotation now too. 3 of them are Warpack veterans, retired, and they are considerably larger than Hollowhorn, and they do not press resonance ridges to gate mesh the way the cubs do. They stand at their gates and watch me with the amber eyes and produce the station tone at a frequency that sits below the threshold of easy hearing. I feel it in my chest, slow and steady, while I do my count. I don't know what it says about a person being on a Vrethkai station tone. I've thought about it. I don't have a clean answer. I know that when I come through the bulkhead door at 06:30 and the resonance starts, it is not a sound that frightens me anymore, if it ever did. And I know that Sekit has been pressing her resonance ridges to the gate mesh for 8 months now with the same patient attention she gave the very first piece of flatbread. And I know that Hollowhorn stands at her gate with the same evaluative stillness she had in month 4 when she decided whatever it was she decided. And the conclusion she came to has not changed. I do my job. I check the manifests. I file the welfare notes. I eat my flatbread in sub-7 at 06:30 because the level 3 mess still has a 40-minute queue, and I have never once had 40 minutes to spare. Preth and Vosk had 40 minutes to spare once, and spent them in the medical bay with elevated distress indicators and a behavioral wellness evaluation. I have thought about this sometimes while I stand at the gate and the station tone fills the hold with its slow foundational hum. 10 voices in the walls of Corvith Station, confirming the same thing they have been confirming since month 1. He is here, he is ours, and we know exactly where everything else is. I don't think they'll be back.